It's May 1945. Picture it. Europe is in ruins. The war machine that consumed the world for 6 long years has finally, violently, shuddered to a halt. But for millions of people, soldiers and civilians alike, trapped in the East, the war isn't over, not by a long shot. In fact, it's just entered its most terrifying, most desperate phase.
So, I want you to do something for me. Just for a second, put yourself in their shoes. You're a German soldier. Everything you were told to fight for, to die for, it's all turned to ash. The government has collapsed. Your commanders are gone. Survival now comes down to one last, critical decision. It's not about victory or defeat anymore. It's a choice that will determine whether you ever see your family again.
You have two options. To the east, you have the Soviet Red Army, an army fueled by a righteous, burning vengeance for the absolute horror they endured on their own soil. You know what your side did in their homeland. You've heard the stories. And to the west, the Americans. They've pushed deep into Germany, but now they've stopped at a river, the Elbe. So this choice you have to make, it's not just about picking a different uniform to surrender to. No, this is a gamble for your very existence.
Now you have to understand, for the people on the ground, this wasn't about politics. The ideology was dead. This was a cold, hard calculation. It was based on whispers from the front line, rumors carried by exhausted refugees, and this shared, terrifying understanding of what was coming from the East. It was about the brutal, simple mathematics of survival. Just look at this. This breaks it down to the most basic element of life: food. In a Soviet camp, you were looking at maybe 600, 800 calories a day. That's not living. For a grown man, especially one forced into hard labor, that's just a slow-motion death sentence. But in American custody, 2,000, sometimes almost 3,000 calories. They had the logistics, the supply lines, they could actually feed their prisoners. This isn't just a number on a chart. It's the difference between wasting away in a Siberian camp and actually having a chance to go home. And this chart tells the whole story. These are the ultimate stakes. If you surrendered to the Americans or the British, you had a better than 96% chance of surviving. Pretty good odds, all things considered. But if you were captured by the Soviets, your odds plummeted, less than 65%. In some of those camps, especially in the chaos of 45, the death rate was closer to 50%. It was a coin flip for your life. Suddenly, the choice becomes terrifyingly clear, doesn't it? And this quote from a German sergeant named Wilhelm Becker just cuts right to the heart of it. It wasn't just about the food or the statistics. It was about the idea of humanity. Think about what that means. After years of a war that was designed to be as brutal as possible, a war of extermination on the Eastern Front, the simple possibility of being treated like a human being seemed impossible, like a fantasy. But it was a fantasy so powerful they were willing to risk everything to race toward it.
Okay, so you've made your choice. You're heading west. But how do you actually get there? It wasn't just a walk in the park. It was a desperate, deadly gauntlet through a world that was literally falling apart. Imagine trying to move not just yourself, but hundreds of thousands of soldiers and terrified civilians. You've got the Red Army at your back, closing in, relentless. And ahead of you, in between you and the Americans, you've got fanatical SS units, your own countrymen with orders to shoot anyone they considered a deserter. You're trapped, caught between a hammer and an anvil. And this is where one man makes a decision that changes history: General Walther Wenck. Hitler, hiding in his bunker in Berlin, gives Wenck a direct order: turn your 12th Army around and attack towards Berlin. A suicidal, pointless last stand. But Wenck looked at his exhausted soldiers. He saw the endless columns of refugees, old men, women, children, and he made his choice. He disobeyed a direct order from his Führer. He told his men their duty was no longer to a dead idea, but to the living. And he turned his entire army into a giant rescue operation, attacking west to punch a hole through to the Americans. This timeline just shows you how incredibly tight that window of hope really was. Wenck's decision on April 20th kicks the whole thing off. But then, on May 7th, Germany officially surrenders. And that sets a hard deadline: May 8th, at 1 minute past 11 at night. That's when the ceasefire takes effect. If you made it across the Elbe River before then, you were an American POW. If you arrived 1 minute later, you belonged to the Soviets. The race was well and truly on.
And the price of that race was just horrific. The breakout from what became known as the Elbe Pocket is maybe the most brutal example. We're talking about the German 9th Army plus tens of thousands of civilians trying to smash their way through the Soviet lines. They were hammered by artillery, by aircraft. It was just a kill box. As one German colonel said, it wasn't a war anymore, it was a massacre.
The final numbers are just staggering. Of the 200,000 people who started that breakout, half of them were killed or just disappeared, vanished. Only 1 out of every 5 actually made it to the American lines. Just think about that for a second. People willingly faced a 50% chance of death for the hope of reaching a slightly better form of prison camp. That tells you everything you need to know about what they were running from.
But for the lucky few who made it through that gauntlet, what they found waiting for them at the Elbe River was something straight out of a dream. At the one bridge still standing, a busted-up railway bridge at a town called Tangermunde, something incredible happened. Enemies who had been trying to kill each other just days before became partners in a massive humanitarian rescue.
This is where the story gets truly unbelievable. You had German combat engineers working like mad on the east side of this broken bridge, trying to keep it from collapsing. And on the west side, American engineers were doing the exact same thing. German and American officers stood side by side, directing the flood of people. And then, and this is one of the most surreal moments of the entire war, American artillery actually started firing over the heads of the surrendering Germans to hold off the advancing Soviet troops and give them more time to cross.
This quote from an American officer, William Davis, just captures it all. The rules of war, the hatred, it all just melted away in that moment. Because everyone there, no matter what uniform they were wearing, understood the mission had changed. The mission was no longer about winning a war, it was about saving lives.
And this one line, spoken by an American doctor to a German nurse as they both worked on wounded soldiers, it sums up the whole incredible shift. The labels of enemy and friend were gone. All that was left was a doctor and a patient, a person who needed help and a person who could give it. For those few frantic days on a riverbank in Germany, our shared humanity won.
So you might be thinking, okay, that's a wild story. But why does this one chaotic event at the very end of a war that happened decades ago still matter? Well, it matters because the consequences of that choice, the race west, and the American decision to accept the surrender directly shaped the world that came next. In fact, it shaped the world that you live in today. Let's just break this down. Because all those soldiers and scientists surrendered to the West, America gained access to incredible scientific knowledge. It gave the US a huge intelligence head start against the Soviets as the Cold War was just beginning. But maybe most importantly, it saved an entire generation of German men, the engineers, the doctors, the teachers, the managers, who would be absolutely essential for rebuilding West Germany into the stable, democratic, prosperous ally that it became. That one act of mercy at the Elbe River laid a foundation of trust that has defined German-American relations ever since.
And if you want the single most famous example of this, here it is, Wernher von Braun, the father of the Saturn V rocket. He and his entire team of rocket scientists made a calculated 500-kilometer journey across a collapsing country for one single purpose, to find and surrender to the Americans. That one decision, made in the chaos of 1945, is what led directly to the Apollo program. It's what put a man on the moon.
In the end, the grim accounting proves that the desperate gamble was worth it. Look at those numbers. More than 1 million German prisoners died in Soviet captivity, a death rate 10 times higher than in the West. This isn't just data. It's a memorial to more than 1 million individual lives that were snuffed out after the war was over, and it's a validation for every single person who risked it all to race west.
And we come back to General Wenck. His own words really frame the moral heart of this entire story. He was faced with a choice: follow his orders, his duty, what some might call honor, or save hundreds of thousands of lives. He chose humanity, and he left it for the rest of us to judge if he was right. But after all the talk of armies and geopolitics and legacies, it all comes down to this one quote from a 63-year-old man, one of the very last people to make it across that bridge. Why did he do it? Why did he risk everything? It wasn't for ideology or for history. It was for the most simple, powerful, and universal reason in the world.
And that's the result. 250,000 people. 250,000 lives saved, all because one general, in the middle of a global catastrophe, decided that human life was more important than a dying ideology. It's a staggering testament to the power of a single moral choice.
So it leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? In the final, chaotic moments of a war, when all the lines have blurred, what is the real measure of victory?
Maybe it isn't about flags on maps or unconditional surrenders. Maybe, just maybe, true victory is found in those rare, unbelievable moments when, against all odds, we choose to save a life instead of taking one.